Alright, welcome. So this is 4.6, congruence in right triangles. Make sure you have the header written down. And let's get to it. Okay, so the first thing that we are going to write down is we have some definitions right here. All that really matters is I want you to write down this picture. So this picture right here is what I want you to write down. So we have a right triangle, where my angle is a right triangle right there, is a right angle right there, and I have a triangle, so it's called a right triangle. Across from the right angle, I have my hypotenuse, that's my longest side, and then the other two sides are called legs, okay? Alright, so make sure you have that written down. Alright, and let's get to one of our theorems that we have here. So our theorem that we have is called the hypotenuse leg theorem. So we also call it HL theorem because we love to abbreviate in math. So we're going to write down everything we have inside that box right there. Okay, so what this theorem says though is if the hypotenuse and a leg of one right triangle are congruent, okay, so I see that they are right triangles because they have 90 degrees. And if it tells me that the two hypotenuse are the same and I have one of the legs is the same, then I know that these two triangles are congruent. So this is another way to be able to figure out if triangles are congruent. So remember before we had like our 4 shortcuts where we said side, 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 angle, and angle, angle, side. Those were my 4 shortcuts. Well, when I have a right triangle, here's another shortcut. If they have the same hypotenuse, same side, then I know that they are the same triangle. Okay, alright, so let's go into our problems that we have here. Alright, so our problem number 1 right here is, it says that on a basketball backboard, brackets shown, so you have angle ADC and angle BDC are right angles, AC is congruent to BC, are the two triangles congruent to each other? Okay, so again, very similar to the problems that we just did in our previous lesson. Let's fill out this picture as we are going with the information that we have. So it says angle ADC, that right there is going to be a right angle, and angle BDC, this right here is going to be a right angle as well. Okay, it says AC and BC are congruent, so it tells me that AC and BC are congruent. So it says, are the two triangles congruent? So remember, how do I know, if I'm looking at this triangle, how do I know what my hypotenuse is? Remember the hypotenuse, and you don't need to draw this, but it's the one across from your right angle. So this is my hypotenuse right there. You don't need to draw a little arrow, but just remember that it's across from the right angle. So I know that the AC is my hypotenuse as well as BC. Okay, and then I'm looking, in order for these two right triangles to be congruent, they have to be a right triangle, so they both have 90 degrees, check. And they have to have, the hypotenuse has to be congruent, we just said check. And they have to have at least one leg. Well, we see right here that they both share CD. So remember, like my reflexive property, they both share that, so bam, we have enough information. So we can say that these two triangles are congruent. So we would say triangle ADC is going to be congruent to triangle, and remember we have to put it with our corresponding parts. We would say BDC are congruent, and how do we know that? That is my hypotenuse leg theorem. My hypotenuse leg theorem right there. Have the hypotenuse, they're a right triangle, and they have a leg in common, so my two triangles are congruent. Alright, so my last one that I have right here is we're going to do a proof, and we're going to try and prove that ZW is congruent to YX. So I see I have these two triangles right here, and I see how they like overlap each other. Now what I should do when it comes to this though is I should always try and like draw a picture of them separate, because it makes it a lot easier for me to see what they have in common, where they overlapped at. So what I would do right here is we should draw a picture. I have a picture right here for us. So the picture looks something like this. So we have, when I separate these two triangles, so they're overlapping, I see that I have W, I have X, and I have WX, and I see what angles they have in common. And then I see too here that they both overlap at WX. So all I got to do now is do a proof in order to show that my two triangles are congruent. Okay, so let's do a proof right here. Let's do number one. We always write down what's given. So angle ZXW is congruent to YWX, and angle ZWX is congruent to angle, oops, should be an angle right there, angle YWX. Okay, and that was given. Okay, again, I always make sure that I mark it off on the side. I know what I'm doing. So I have an angle and an angle so far, angle and an angle. And on my picture, I can write angle and an angle right there. That's what I have so far. So remember, when we're trying to figure out if triangles are congruent, remember all the 4 shortcuts that we have? One of my 4 was angle, side, angle, and each of the ones I need to have a side. Well, if they share that in common, then we know that both of these WX is going to be the same. So for number 2 right here, we would write that WX is congruent to WX. And then how do we know that? That is my reflexive property. My reflexive property. So 3 now. So now I have, here is my, I should do this, there's my side right there. I have a side. So how do I know that these triangles are both the same, both congruent? Well, I know that they're congruent through my angle, side angle, angle, side angle. Okay, so I'm going to do triangle WXZ. WXZ is going to be congruent to triangle, and then make sure they have to go in the same order. So W right here matches with X, so I have to have X. X right here matches with W, so I have W, and then Z right here matches with Y. So remember, I have to have it in the correct order. So now I just stated that the 2 triangles are the same. So now that we know that they are the same, we know that ZW, that segment, is going to be congruent to YX. And how do we know that? We know that because corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. CPC-TC. Okay? So the biggest thing with that problem is that when we see something overlapping like that, it's best to draw pictures of the 2 triangles separate, so that way it becomes a lot easier to see what we have in common and what we need in order to solve it. So if they're overlapping, separate it out into 2 pictures, and that made it a lot easier for us to solve. All right, see you guys.